Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're diving into Applying the Scientific Method to Learn from Mistakes and Approach Truth by Finlay MacRitchie. It's really about how we think, and how we could all become more discerning in this world that's just overflowing with information.
Absolutely. And what makes this book even more interesting is that MacRitchie, he isn't just some philosopher sitting in an armchair. He's a real scientist. He's been doing this for years, and he brings a unique perspective to these questions.
Right. And he really shares his journey, too, which is anything but conventional. He actually grew up on a remote Australian dairy farm dealing with bushfires, limited resources. It makes you wonder what that was like as the backdrop for a developing scientific mind.
Yeah, it's a great example of how challenge and resilience go together. He even tells this story about when he was a kid, he was convinced that his family's water tank was magically making raspberry cordial sometimes. And he was determined to figure out how that miracle worked.
Okay, I love that. A budding scientist trying to figure out the cordial tank. It reminds us that curiosity is often sparked by these simple observations. MacRitchie really argues that facing challenges head-on really shaped his resilience and self-reliance, qualities he believes are often lacking in today's generation.
He does, and it makes you think, are we doing kids a disservice by shielding them from struggle?
That's a great question. So a resilient kid grows up, heads off to university, and dives into the world of science. What was his area of focus?
Well, he specialized in surface chemistry and colloids. Specifically, he studied something called monolayers. Basically, it's like a film so thin, it's only one molecule thick.
Okay, that sounds complex. Why should we care about monolayers?
Think of it this way. Imagine a soap bubble. That delicate, shimmering layer. That's basically a monolayer. They're really important for understanding all sorts of things, especially cell membranes.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
So this is about understanding those boundaries, the interfaces where things interact at a molecular level.
Exactly. And MacRitchie's research involved manipulating these monolayers and seeing how they behaved. He was trying to understand these tiny interactions, the ones that govern so much of the world around us.
It's amazing to think about how these microscopic studies can have such big implications.
They do, but the book isn't just about the details of his research. What he's really saying is that the way a scientist approaches a problem can be used in almost any part of life. From looking at the news to making decisions, even having those tough conversations with your family who might have different views.
So it's about applying that same rigor and curiosity to everyday situations, not just the lab.
Exactly. And he has these funny anecdotes from his time at university. He talks about this lab mishap where a container of liquid turns into milk.
Wait, what? Liquid turning into milk? That sounds like a magic trick gone wrong.
Right. He also talks about this professor. This professor had a very interesting way of starting his lectures. These stories really bring the ideas to life. And they remind us that science is a human thing. It's driven by curiosity, trial and error, and even a little bit of humor.
It makes me think about how we separate science as this different field, when in reality it's all about asking questions and trying to understand the world. That's something we all do, whether we realize it or not.
It really is, and this leads to one of MacRitchie's big arguments. The idea that our education system, with all the tests and memorizing things, it might actually be hurting our ability to think critically.
It's almost like we're being trained to just absorb information instead of really questioning it.
That's a good way to put it. He uses some big examples to show this, like the Cardinal Pell case and the climate change debate. These were times when public opinion was swayed by emotion, ideology, and what he calls groupthink.
Groupthink. That's when we just go along with the crowd, right? Even when it goes against what we think.
Exactly. It's about accepting information without really thinking about it. And he says this is dangerous, especially with so much information out there.
So if we're just hearing what we want to hear, how do we break free, become better thinkers?
He gives us some tools, things to help us identify bad thinking patterns, like persuasive language exaggeration, and something called the straw man argument. It's when someone twists their opponent's words to make them look bad.
Like a mental workout for our brains.
You got it. And he doesn't just point out problems, he wants to change education, to focus on critical thinking debate and teaching history in a balanced way.
So he wants to change how we learn and think, like John Gatto and John Medina.
Yeah. Gatto thought regular school killed creativity. He wanted more community learning and real-world stuff.
In Medina, he's all about movement and using our senses to learn.
Right. And MacRitchie, he looks at big issues too, like climate change and COVID-19. He says many policies were based on bad science and fear.
He's not afraid to shake things up.
Not at all. He especially criticizes the IPCC, their focus on consensus and models. instead of real-world testing, has given us a skewed view of climate change.
So he wants us to be skeptical and look at the evidence.
Exactly. He talks about Clintel. They're scientists who want a more objective way to study climate change.
It's about challenging what we think, looking at all the evidence.
Right, and being open to the idea that we might be wrong.
It's that humility that helps us grow.
Absolutely. And his book encourages that honesty. It's about questioning everything, being open, and always searching for truth.
It's refreshing in a world where everyone seems so stuck in their ways.
It is, and his book gives us a way to deal with complexity, to cut through the noise and make better decisions.
He's giving us tools to think for ourselves.
Exactly. And he makes it interesting and engaging. He uses science, real examples, stories, and even humor.
This book sounds like something everyone should read. To learn how to think critically, see through things, and make better choices. Before everyone runs to buy it, let's recap. What are the big things listeners should take away?
Well, I think a big one is using scientific thinking everywhere in your life. Being skeptical, questioning things, looking for proof, and being willing to change your mind.
Like always being ready to learn something new.
Yeah. Another thing is resilience. Like MacRitchie says, facing challenges. Instead of avoiding them, it makes you stronger and more adaptable.
So it's good to go through tough times.
Yeah.
Learn from your mistakes and see them as chances to grow.
Exactly. And the last thing is being careful about the information we take in, noticing how people try to influence us, watching out for groupthink, and getting different viewpoints before making up our minds.
It's about taking charge of what we believe, not just accepting anything we hear.
Right.
MacRitchie's book reminds us that critical thinking is super important. It's not just some theory, it's a skill we need to make good decisions for ourselves, our communities, the whole world.
I agree. This book is like a wake-up call to never stop questioning, learning, and searching for the truth.
If you're ready for that, we highly recommend Applying the Scientific Method to Learn from Mistakes and Approach Truth by Finlay MacRitchie. You can find a link to buy it in the show notes. And while you're there, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into these awesome books.
We look at a new one each week with ideas that can change how you see things.
So as you go about your day, here's something to think about. How do you approach those tough topics? How do you make sure you're not being swayed by bias or only part of the story? Keep those questions in mind, stay curious, and until next time, keep those mindful moments going.